May 19th, 1991, my 15th birthday. As the end of the party neared, when I was opening gifts, my parents produced a large, neatly wrapped box and set it at my feet. I was somewhat skeptical, as my parents had used large boxes in the past to conceal much smaller gifts. We weren't that well off, but my parents were trying, and I loved them for it. I bent over to pick up the present, anticipating a lighter weight, but what I found, I could barely lift it. I set it back down again and looked over at my parents, who had matching looks of excitement and smugness. I gently opened the wrapping paper and saw the top of the box. It was a word processor. My heart leapt momentarily, but I pushed my excitement aside, as I knew not to get my hopes up. I loved my parents and all, but as I said earlier, they weren't that well off, so this may have been another trick. I finished slowly unwrapping the box, and then my heart leapt again as I saw an undisturbed strip of packing tape stretched from one side to the other. My dad pulled his trusty pocket knife from his belt and handed it to me, smiling. Despite the possibility of this being another trick, I was careful, just in case this was the real deal. I opened the box and saw styrofoam. I moved to hand the knife back to my dad, who waved me away.
That's part 1 of your gift,
he said.
Now open part 2.
He added with barely suppressed excitement. My eyes lit up. I grabbed the styrofoam packaging and removed it, the cream color of the word processor looking like the most beautiful sight to ever be beheld by my eyes. Wait, no, you should... I babbled incoherently with excitement. I ran to my parents and swept them into a huge hug. This was the most amazing thing they had ever done for me, and I couldn't help but say, "How could you afford this? You shouldn't have!" As that word processor had to have cost over $1,000, more than our family car was even worth at the time. "Don't worry, sweetie. You don't need to know why. Just remember how much we love you," my mother stated, with a tear falling from the corner of her eye. I picked up the box with a grunt and ran to my room, where I began the process of setting it back up on my desk. 20 minutes later, I sat and hesitantly pushed the power switch and marveled at the startup screen. I won't bore you with the details of my time spent finding out everything about it. 17 years later. I groaned as I walked through the front door. "How'd it go, honey?" My wife met me at the door and embraced me. "Same as usual." My wife looked down, feeling deflated. When we had first met in 1995, I was just beginning my career as a writer. A short time later, we were married, and then a few months after that, my writing completely halted, and I ended up waking up in the hospital. I spent 6 long years in the psychiatric ward of that hospital, then was finally released a few months before 9/11. I kept up with my appointments with the psychiatrist, and went about life as usual. Today's appointment had gone the same, with trying to get me out of my mental state and back to the way things had been back when I was writing. I collapsed on the couch, mentally and physically exhausted. "Bye, honey! Don't wait up!" my wife called from the door, about to leave for her job. My mental state was so bad, I couldn't even work, and my only passion in this life was writing, something that I hadn't been able to do for a long time. I said goodbye, and then reflected on the way things had become. Writing was the only thing that I had a passion for, the only thing that made me happy, and I kind of felt like a schmuck for sitting at home in my pajamas all day while my wife works her butt off. I sighed deeply. A story idea had been invading my mind ever since my appointment had first began. It was about a terrorist attack on Mumbai, and about the survivors and their struggles afterwards. I emerged from the attic, carrying with me the word processor. I walked down the stairs to this kitchen, where I set it on the table and set it up. The startup screen was the same as it had been back in 1991, the same feeling of wonder felt as back then. I began to write. The story flowed from my fingers onto the keyboard. It seemed to come from thin air. I was typing the date, February 3rd, 2019, and the computer glitched, the spellcheck function correcting the date to November 26, 2008. I deleted the text and typed in the other date. It corrected again. I kept trying to change it, getting more and more disturbed as nothing would change. I finally gave up. A file then opened at random when I turned my back, and when I turned back around, I nearly fainted. I recalled the story that I began back in 95, and the events that caused my breakdown came back in a flood. I read through the few pages I had managed to write so far, and then remembered something. I had tried to change the date in this story too. I decided to experimentally change the date to another one, and the computer did the same thing, and auto-corrected back to the other date listed. I sat at the computer, holding the knife my father had given me all those years ago, contemplating the blade. I then decided to open up a new document and type in certain names of attacks, but changed the dates to ones that didn't match. The computer hesitated for a moment, and then all of the dates auto-corrected to the appropriate ones that corresponded with each new attack. I had the knife resting on my arm for some reason, and at that moment the auto-correct occurred. I keeled over, the knife slicing through my wrist. That was how my wife found me when she arrived home from work around 10 p.m. The blood loss had caused me to remain unconscious, but I was still alive in a slightly aware state. My wife checked the computer and saw what had happened and went pale. All of it was now clear, and she knew I didn't try to kill myself. My computer was able to predict every terrorist attack before it occurred. The last date on the new document showed August 6, 2008, 10:03 p.m. It was 10:02 and 58 seconds. The scream my wife let out was the last thing I heard before an immense heat and violent shaking enveloped the house.